I suffered from anxiety disorders for years and years and years, and got to the point where I was very close to, taking my own life because of it, and living in very dark days, even from childhood onwards. And when I found some formulas, so the proper mindset, proper skill sets to be able to deal with this stuff, and I stopped looking to be dependent on other people or other things, I started to heal myself. When I started to heal myself from those anxiety disorders, I started to get a little frantic, a little scared, like what's going on? This is new. And then the healing arose kind of naturally from there. And then towards the end, I said, well, why don't I just kind of use this and put it there and see if anybody's gonna listen. Let's see if we can help a couple people.
Yeah.
And this was kind of a decade back where it was just, a decade back where everything was connected to managing and coping with anxiety and those symptoms, and kind of distraction methods and such. And I said, well, why don't we try to go another direction? And if people are interested in it and can relate to it, then that's fantastic. Then that's great for me and great for them. So it kind of manifested through a lot of pain, a lot of trial and error, and getting myself to a good place first, and then naturally kind of being pulled in that direction, like, let's do something with this. So that's where we are.
Cool. So how long have you been doing your podcast then? How long has your show been out?
The show, so there's two podcasts. The main podcast been out for about 4 years.
Okay.
The other podcast, which is related to health anxiety, specifically dealing with bodily symptoms of anxiety and hypochondria, has been out for a shorter time, about a year.
Okay.
And that's a monthly podcast. But
Right.
yeah, when I was young, people used to tell me, Dennis, you got a great radio voice, and why don't you do something with it? It's very calming. So
Yeah.
as we went on, podcasting was very new still, about a couple years back, and I decided, hey, it's a good way to reach people.
Yeah. So what is the difference then between health anxiety and anxiety? Kind of the difference between your podcasts. Obviously they have different topics. Like, what could you explain that to somebody who might not have any idea? I mean, I don't have any idea, but to the listeners, could you explain,
Sure.
what is the difference between the two of those things?
Many times they go hand in hand, in fact, Dan. Health anxiety specifically is a fear of what bodily sensations and bodily symptoms mean. A lot of health anxiety sufferers misinterpret their bodily symptoms. So you'll see that they have built up habits of going to the doctors constantly, asking for reassurance from other people if in fact this symptom is something that's dangerous or related to a structural issue or something like that. And so they'll be very, very caught up in their bodily symptoms and the misinterpretations behind them.
Okay.
And these people with health anxiety will go through the entire day, mainly focusing on whether the symptom is present and if it's going to get worse or better. And it doesn't matter if they're talking to someone, and no matter what situation they're in, it doesn't matter. They're more focused on what's going on the inside rather than focusing on what's going on the outside. So they have a very difficult time playing with their kids. They have a very difficult time loving their spouse. They have a very difficult time building their careers because they're so connected to the threat of what the bodily symptom may bring with it.
Okay.
Anxiety, on the other side, generalized anxiety, is more so situational and external. So, is this person going to accept what I'm about to say? Am I going to present myself in a proper way when I go give this speech? Yada, yada, yada. So it's more situational. It's more people-based. But health anxiety is very much internal, bodily symptom, bodily sensation based. Many times, salt and pepper, they go hand in hand. One leads to the other leads to this one. And again, like during my days with anxiety, I had multiple anxiety disorders. Depending on the day, I would go through a specific label. It's either panic disorder, health anxiety, or generalized anxiety.
Okay.
And I basically carried those labels with me every day.
Sure. So how do you go about starting to recognize that, hey, maybe this is anxiety that you're wrestling with? Because I'm sure like people like okay, let me back up. I know myself, like I would not classify myself as being an anxious person, somebody with anxiety. Now there are moments that definitely lead to me being anxious, or me feeling like I have anxiety. So how can you navigate between, okay, you have anxiety and you don't have anxiety, you're just anxious right now? Like, is that like, I guess, how do those differ? Like somebody having anxiety versus being anxious in the moment, how does that differ?
When you have anxiety, it's basically taking over one or multiple aspects of your life. It's like you're dealing with this invisible threat rather than having your focus turn to what's going on in the situation, what's going on in the present moment. When you're dealing with anxiety, you're constantly fixated on the future. When you're not dealing with anxiety, you're more so in the present moment and engaged with whoever you're engaged with or engaged in what you're doing. For example, I used to go and go work out. Okay, I'm going to the gym, I'm working out. With anxiety, I'm going to the gym thinking that if people see my bodily symptoms or sensations, they're going to think I'm crazy. Or how long am I going to last at the gym? I would create these scenarios in my mind, and that created in my mind, it would turn into my body of what was
Okay.
going to happen, the worst possible scenario. But when you don't have anxiety, you're focused on, getting your water bottle ready. You're focused on the drive there. You're focused on how many reps you're doing in the moment. You're
Yeah.
focused on how good the workout is. Anxiety is constantly fixated on an irrational catastrophic threat that may arise in the future. Whereas non-anxiety means that you can be anxious. You can have an anxious moment, but it doesn't turn into a snowball. There's no
Okay.
snowball there. It's just a moment, and you're able to see beyond it. And because you see beyond it, you don't get caught up in it. You realize how ridiculous it may be, or how irrational these thoughts may be, and you move forward.
Okay, that makes sense, because I've always been like wondered that, I guess, like, you know there are, especially as a business owner, there are multiple moments a day probably where I'm just like real anxious about, something that might happen, or I might get a message or a cancellation from a member or something like that, and I'm just like freak out for a second, and I'm like, okay, everything's fine, just kind of back to normal. So you're saying if I had anxiety, like if I were to be diagnosed with anxiety, um I would kind of snowball that one thing into the rest of the day, more or less. Am I understanding that?
Bingo. And
Okay.
it many times it starts the moment you wake up. I call it
Okay.
the spider web effect. The spider web effect is where you begin thinking about going to the gym the moment you wake up. Hey, the gym's a good place to go. I'm getting healthier there. But an anxiety sufferer begins thinking about all the catastrophic things that could arise by going to the gym. And many times their world becomes smaller and smaller and smaller
Okay.
because they've thought themselves out of doing the right things for themselves. So that's a life of anxiety, basically. And people with anxiety go about their entire days thinking that they are the anxiety disorder. And they bring around this label, they carry around this heavy emotional bag with them, and they check in with it no matter what they're doing. Right? Like
Right.
I could be talking to you right now, and if I had that anxiety disorder label with me, I would be thinking like things like, "Oh, am I saying the right thing? Do I look okay?
Right.
Am I twitching too much? All these sorts of things. Is this interview going to go all right? Are people going to listen to it?" I would be so concerned about the end result. I would be concerned about your thoughts over me,
Right.
overly concerned. But now that that's not there, we're present. We're here in the moment. We're speaking. We're having a conversation, and we're engaged in what we're doing. So it's very much a label-based way of living. It's like, okay, well, I'm going to go do that thing. I was invited to this social dinner or something tonight, and I check in with my anxiety disorder label. Is it okay to go? Who's going to be there? Right? What am I going to drink there? What am I going to eat?
Yeah.
Yada, yada, yada. So anything that could go wrong goes wrong in an anxiety sufferer's mind prior to going into a situation.
Okay, so you're like almost wrapped up in the what ifs versus being in the moment and just kind of not even experimenting, just being present and living, in the moment with what's happening. Okay. Um, so Dennis, you mentioned before we started recording, it might have been right at the beginning, but you mentioned that you struggled with anxiety yourself. So how did you start to recognize like this is what I'm dealing with and start getting from being somebody who has anxiety to now, whether you say you don't have anxiety or you've coped with it very well, like either way, like how have you gotten from being an anxiety ridden person to where you are now?
Well, the truth is, it all began by me realizing that I have to be less or non-dependent and be completely independent. So I got to a place where I realized the answers are not on the outside. The answers are within me. I need to take full responsibility and get to a place where I realize that I've suffered enough, because nobody changes until they've suffered enough. I got to that place of being in rock bottom on my knees. I'm not going to live another day with this thing. And only then did I realize what was keeping me anxious. And the truth was, what was keeping me anxious was suppressed emotions, suppressed energy within me, anger, blame, guilt, unforgiveness, and all of them highly ridden within my childhood, traumas from my past. And these traumas were showing up as symptoms. They were showing up as intrusive thoughts, trying to get my conscious mind's attention to say, hey, is it time to resolve this now? So what I wasn't doing was resolving that the emotional baggage that I was carrying. I wasn't resolving it. I was looking for ways to place band-aids over it constantly.
Okay.
That's dependence. Okay. What's the next pill? What's the next, what's the next this or that or whatever. So I was moving towards a place where I was looking directly towards why I was experiencing this thing, rather than looking for ways to deal with it just for a brief time. That was the
Okay.
difference. So I began reframing my emotional traumas, and I began responding correctly in the moment of fear. Therefore, I didn't have the spiderweb effect show up anymore. Many people with anxiety think that they need to get rid of their thoughts or get rid of their symptoms in the moment, but that's the wrong approach. That's the wrong response. Instead, your goal should be to become bored and disinterested by the things that used to threaten you, like the thoughts. You
Okay.
wouldn't sit there and watch paint dry for an hour, right?
Right.
You want to get to the point where you see these ideas floating in your head, these catastrophic ideas, and be bored by them, be disinterested by them. And when you become more disinterested by them, boom, now you're in the present moment. So it was a combination of mindset, becoming independent, getting to the place of no return, total dissatisfaction with the way I was living. And then what was really interesting then was that I started to find that the answers were coming to me rather than me forcefully looking for them. This is a very important thing to understand. People are forcing healing upon themselves too much, rather than having faith in the patience that it's going to come to them as they do some of the self-care work, right? The big difference there in mindset.
Yeah. I thought you were about to say something else. So I was going to jump in and I thought you were going to say something. So,
Yeah.
so as you're like becoming more like self-aware of thoughts and actions and where you are, and you said almost having like that point of no return. Um, Was there a turning point for you, or was it this just kind of like a cumulative effect of, a couple of years or maybe a couple of months? I don't know how the time frame, but um, was it a cumulative effect of you just putting in the work at making yourself mentally stronger, or was it like, okay, this really crazy bad thing or crazy good thing, whatever, happened, and I dealt with my anxiety, and from then on, it's been a little easier. Like, I guess how did that happen for you?
What was really interesting was that it took me about close to 3 months, around 3 months, to have a big enough emotional shift, an emotional shift within me that then changed my entire belief systems. So you do the self-care work, with the faith, with the patience that when the time is right to heal, you will convince your subconscious mind that, hey, there doesn't need to be this feeling of standing guard all the time and being sensitized all the time. It's a convincing game. And nothing changes until someone has an emotional shift in the exact situation where they used to be threatened. So that came after self-care, that came after a set period of time. But what happened during that time was I kept reminding myself that when my body is ready to heal, it will heal. When my body's ready to heal, it will heal. Rather than, why haven't I healed yet? I'm doing all the right things. The
Right.
difference there,
Right.
right? It's, you're going to the gym, you got your 12 sets in, you go home, you check the mirror to see if there are any changes. You do that for 2-3 days, then you talk yourself out of going to the gym again, right?
Right.
It's like, I'm not doing it right, or I just don't have the genes. It's the same thing with anxiety. People begin talking and thinking themselves out of healing when they don't see the results they want to see in the time they want to see it. That's the biggest problem. Just stay on the path. And I tell them, all you got to focus on is be relentless. Be relentless with the self-care work that your body is telling you that you need. End of story. And if you're relentless enough, then you don't have to focus on the results. You know you're on the right path, and your body, your mind, your spirit will heal itself in time. So that's kind of the time frame it took me, about 3 months, to get to a place where I could really start to feel like I can let go and be more unconscious rather than be so aware all the time of what I was
Right.
doing.
Right. Do
Yeah.
you find now that you kind of seek moments that would previously have given you like a panic attack or an anxiety attack? Like, do you, now that you've kind of worked through some of the anxiety like inside of your own life, like, do you find yourself like searching for moments that would push you to be slightly uncomfortable, or
Oh,
I guess like,
yeah.
go ahead.
Yeah. I mean, what was interesting? After that 3-month mark, I used to place myself in situations that used to cause me panic attacks.
Really?
I would literally, yeah, I would do some crazy things. I I would consciously put myself in a place of suffering rather than wait to be unconsciously suffering. I would wear pajamas to the shopping mall, right? I would drink cups and cups of coffee, all sorts of things that I could never do before. But I place myself in these situations to prove to myself that, hey, mind, hey, body, your reactions, the way you used to react to these scenarios, were completely false, and we can ridicule those now. So,
Right.
um, I even slept outside. I was so afraid of going broke or poverty. Every day I used to make sure that everything is in place, total control, total certainty all the time with my finances. Oh my God, if we go broke, what am I going to do? I
Yeah.
slept outside for a number of nights. I slept outside next to homeless people just to prove to myself that it wasn't as bad as my mind was making it out to be. So when I began suffering with awareness, suffering consciously, then I realized that the very things I used to fear so very much and it kept me from living was all ridiculous. It was all man-made. It was all the creation. It was a creation by me and other people, advertising, marketing, subliminal messaging, all the things we get caught up in. You could
Yeah.
listen to a top 40 song today, a pop song, and you'll probably hear some kind of negative message about 82 times. And next thing you know, you've hypnotized yourself into anxiousness and fear.
Right.
So it's really important that we're aware where we're spending our time, what we're listening to, what we're watching, what kind of people we're surrounding ourselves with. To your conscious mind, it may not mean much, but to your system that's highly invested in trying to keep you safe from danger, it's more, it goes deeper than that. So yeah, it's an interesting journey, to say the least.
Yeah. So with like everything in the world going on and being wild right now with coronavirus and all that stuff happening, and you're in Canada, so like I don't know how much you know about like all the race issue going on in the United States also. Like how does that impact somebody with anxiety? Because so personally, I've not been affected by either of the things. I'm a middle class white kid who grew up in a primarily white town. I've never really experienced any sort of racism. I'm not saying it doesn't exist at all, and it doesn't like I'm saying it needs to be dealt with, but um, I've never experienced it firsthand. And then on top of that, I still don't know anybody to this day who has contracted coronavirus and gotten sick, let alone died. So for me, like I look at it, I'm like just business as usual. We're just being a little bit more careful. But I know that there are people that are like, oh, one person got sick halfway across the world. Like, what if I get sick? And like, I can't imagine being in that space. So can you kind of navigate for me what that would look like for somebody with anxiety? Like what is the first thought? How do we navigate through that? How do we go back to being, back in our normal lives? If we have anxiety with the given situation right now.
I'll tell you something. Here's what I believe. I believe that the vast majority of people today that are so highly sensitized by the coronavirus isn't really sensitized by COVID-19 itself, but they are experiencing traumas that have been suppressed for quite some time that are showing up through the fear of the coronavirus. So what we're dealing with at this point is an addiction to suffering. If someone has a subconscious program within them, built in from childhood, that says life is hard, life is a struggle, life is pain, and you see that pain in your parents, you see that pain in your family, your friends, and so on, then you're going to grow up with these belief systems that say nothing can be smooth. You don't deserve love. You don't deserve to let go for a moment. Letting go and being relaxed means some kind of danger, threat, laziness, yada, yada, yada. So now we've got the COVID thing going on. And, a lot of people need to understand that when someone has overcome their addiction to suffering and they've become addicted to something more creative, they've resolved things from their past, they're no longer carrying anger towards someone, they have forgiven themselves and other people, all the things I talk about in my latest book, Through Reframing. When that's the case, we can begin seeing beyond what the media is telling us, because all this information is coming from the media, and whether we can trust them or not is based on personal opinion. I personally don't. But
Same.
yeah, and I believe that there are some things that are in there that you can do some research in and get to a conclusion yourself about it. But when somebody is clear-minded, when somebody is no longer carrying that emotional baggage with them and coronavirus or COVID shows up, they can see it for what it is. And what it truly is, in my opinion, is something that we don't necessarily need to be so caught up in. And the statistics show that, in fact. But people are so highly sensitive towards anything and are looking for the next thing to be threatened by, looking for the next thing to fear,
Right.
because it's a program. It's the way they live their life. They're trying to prevent something from happening to them constantly, rather than focusing on moving towards creating something within them. That's the problem. If you constantly look to prevent things from your life, you're going to use up a tremendous amount of energy, time, trying to
Yeah.
prevent things from happening. Next thing you know, you're on your deathbed, you're 90 years old, looking back going, what the heck kind of life did I live? I'm regretting the way I lived my life. Is that what you want? I don't think so.
Yeah.
So you want to get to a place where you're in the mode of creation, moving towards something, creating your own identity, rather than looking to prevent things that are going to happen that are very much out of your control many times. People today are trying to control things they have no control over, and finding that they can't find any answers to the questions that they have. They're getting more frustrated, they're getting more anxious, they're getting more fearful, and they're taking it out on people that don't deserve it. So that would really be my stance there, Dan, in terms of the COVID thing and the anxious thing. The addiction to suffering is more so the program that's running within people,
Yeah.
and it's been running for far too long. And it many times is a result of what they've seen in their environment growing up.
Right. So would you would say almost more or less like they are almost choosing to be anxious about this, and maybe it's subconsciously, but they're saying, "Hey, this looks like a thing that I can be stressed about and everybody would understand. I'm going to grab onto that." That might be a very overgeneralization of what you just said, but that's kind of the way that I picked it up. And I know you meant a little bit more than that, but that's kind of how that makes sense in my brain, because I don't connect to that at all. Like when all this stuff started happening, I was like, "Wow, this sucks." Like, I have a business. Hopefully, it makes it through the end, and we'll do it everything we can. And then got to the middle of it, or not. I don't even know if it's the middle. Who knows where we are in this twilight zone? But
Mm-hmm.
got to the point where I was like, you know what, F it, we got to open. Like either we open or we never open. So that's kind of where I'm at right now. So we've been open for a month and a half,
Right.
and every time a police officer drives by the gym, I'm like, shit, here we go. This is it. Like, so I get like that's what I was talking about though. Those little like anxious moments. I'm like, all right, we're gonna get a ticket. Like I'm gonna get my ticket today. But don't tell anybody. But we haven't yet, so that's good. Um, but
Yeah.
Dennis, would you mind giving one or two or maybe a couple big like tips that you could give away to somebody right now who might be struggling with anxiety in, maybe it's the coronavirus situation, maybe it's a home situation, who knows what's going on. Everybody's kind of got different things going on, but generally somebody who might be dealing with anxiety right now, like where would you start with them? Where would you have somebody start on their own? And then how can they find you if they want to get more information from you?
Sure. Um, the most important thing to keep in mind is that, in my opinion, is that you're two different people, two separate people going through each and every day of your life. You're the adult self, which is highly intellectual, and then you're the child self. So you've got the inner wounded child and you've got the adult. When anxiety shows up, if anxiety shows up, instead of thinking that this is related to the current situation or this is related to something going on in the present, and it's a result of your adult self, you need to go ahead and look deeper within to realize that it's related to the inner wounded child self. That child is basically communicating with the adult through your symptoms, through your sensations, through your intrusive thoughts, through all the things that make you feel uncomfortable. And all the inner child is looking for is resolve in terms of an emotion. Many times anxiety sufferers are the very people that tend to hide everything within them. They're not expressive enough. They don't speak up when they want to speak up. They don't shed the tears when they want to shed the tears. They don't allow themselves to be emotional when they want to be emotional.
Right.
So constantly suppressing more and more emotion tells the child that, hey, this is a very scary place to live in. Planet Earth, this society, you need to make sure you stand guard constantly. So if you're currently suffering from anxiety, you need to understand that you're two different people. You're the child and the adult, all wrapped up into one going through the day. If you feel anxious, that's nothing more than a signal, a message, a sign from the inner child that says, hey, are you sure it's okay to go into this situation? Yada, yada, yada. Whatever the story may be from the child, but there's always a story. So now that we know that, we can get to a place where we can be more compassionate towards ourselves when we feel anything anxious showing up. We can be more understanding towards ourselves rather than beat ourselves up for having a feeling. We can be
Right.
more expressive, since that's what the anxiousness many times tells us that we need to do. So this mindset alone, I'm telling you, when you reel it in, is 50% of the journey. You're already there. You will know what to do in the moment intuitively when you can reel in this mindset, because many people out there already have the skills, the tools to be able to deal with their anxiousness because they have kids. And so all you got to do is treat yourself when the anxiousness shows up the same way you would treat your own kids when they have the fears, right?
Yeah,
And you'll
that's
be free. Honey, it's going to be all right. I'll sit beside you during an hour while you go to sleep. There is no boogeyman in the closet, yada, yada, yada.
right.
There's love there. There's compassion there. There's understanding there. So we already have the tools, but now we need to reel in the mindset first. And if anybody wants to get in touch with me, theanxietyguy.com. Check out the Anxiety Guy podcast. You can subscribe there. And I've got the latest book that came out, F Coping, Start Healing, on Amazon, that you can pick up anytime. And there's a wealth of information there that people should be studying.